Number 1. Life on the Moon. It has now been almost 50 years since the last human being set foot upon the lunar surface. History records that between 1969 and 1972, American astronauts carried out a total of 6 successful landings on the Moon. The final mission, Apollo 17, concluded on December 19, 1972, when Eugene Cernan, Harrison Schmitt, and Ronald Evans were recovered from the Pacific Ocean by the crew of the aircraft carrier USS Ticonderoga. Although 3 further Apollo missions had been planned, no manned expedition from any nation has taken place since. The official reason given for NASA's sudden halt to lunar exploration was the shifting financial and political landscape. At the height of the Cold War, the United States' achievement in becoming the first superpower to land men upon the Moon had already delivered President Richard Nixon both prestige and propaganda advantage over the Soviet Union. Yet the costs of the program had spiraled out of control, rising from the original estimate of $7 billion to more than $20 billion, a burden difficult to justify or sustain. The technology of the era allowed astronauts to remain on the surface for only a few hours at a time, and since the early expeditions produced neither valuable resources nor groundbreaking discoveries, NASA could no longer persuade Congress to keep funding it. With the symbolic victory secured, the Soviets gradually lost their own appetite for lunar conquest, and subsequent missile treaties pushed the dream of a permanent colony further into the realm of science fiction. In the decades that followed, nations such as India, China, and the United States continued to launch probes and robotic landers toward various regions of the lunar surface. Most of these either failed due to technical errors or were deliberately crashed after their tasks were complete. Even the successful missions yielded little knowledge beyond what humanity already possessed by the early 1970s. And yet, ever since Apollo was cut short, reports have circulated suggesting that astronauts saw far more upon the Moon than simply rocks and dust. Strange tracks near landing sites, unidentified objects drifting across the skies, even colossal structures in the distance that some claimed could only have been built by extraterrestrials. The question inevitably arose, was the Moon already inhabited, and were its mysterious residents unwelcoming to intruders? In 2015, a story spread across Reddit, purportedly from a British psychologist who claimed to have read classified reports indicating that several landings had taken place after Apollo 17, accompanied by disturbing details of what had really occurred. Though much of it was unverifiable, certain passages echoed elements from NASA's official missions. The anonymous source asserted that as Apollo 17 departed its landing zone, the crew stumbled across the wreckage of another spacecraft. Not only did they find the ruined vessel, but also the bodies of multiple cosmonauts, 2, all apparently Soviet. What shocked them most was that the injuries did not resemble decompression or impact trauma. Rather, they looked like the aftermath of a direct assault. The visors on each helmet had been shattered in the same manner, and the Soviet craft itself lay broken apart. Alarmed, the Americans hurried back to their lunar module and requested immediate departure, but were instructed to wait several more hours due to technical reasons. During this time, their frantic radio transmissions described seeing dark figures moving along the ridgelines around them. The psychologist further claimed that in 1989, a joint British-Soviet mission returned to the site, and he was invited to help debrief the crew. According to his account, a Soviet lander had touched down near the Apollo 17 site in December of 1990, only for its entire crew to be attacked by unknown entities. Technicians at the Akatsuki launch complex allegedly witnessed the assault in real time before all communications were cut. Could the Moon's surface really be littered with the remnants of secret landings that have never been disclosed? Some argue that Russia has never released the full scope of its lunar program. Personnel files of certain cosmonauts may have been altered to conceal deaths that occurred on failed missions, while a handful of amateur radio operators insist they once picked up desperate signals from stranded pilots orbiting the Moon. Even the Apollo astronauts themselves reported strange occurrences. In May of 1969, Gene Cernan and John Young of Apollo 10 claimed they heard an eerie whistling sound rising from below, a bizarre noise they described as, at the time, mission control could offer no explanation. Only years later did engineers attribute it to interference between the spacecraft's VHF transmitters positioned at different points on the module. Another story emerged following the conclusion of Apollo 15 in July of 1971. Transcripts of the radio conversations between David Scott and James Irwin during their extravehicular activities reveal that they stumbled across markings resembling wheel tracks at the base of Hadley Mountain. They described the impressions as stretching east to west, perfectly straight, evenly spaced, and wholly unnatural in appearance. It is the claims surrounding the legendary Apollo 11 that have most inflamed the imaginations of conspiracy theorists. The first alleged encounter occurred just 3 days into the mission, when Commander Neil Armstrong requested confirmation of the location of the Saturn V's third stage in relation to the command module. After a pause of 3 minutes, he was informed that the booster was thousands of miles behind them. Armstrong expressed surprise, for his crewmate Buzz Aldrin had already reported that an object was flying parallel to their trajectory. Armstrong described the craft as a metallic cylinder, glowing faintly at one end. When it disappeared from view and Armstrong again pressed NASA for answers, he was told it was most likely nothing more than a fragment of detached rocket casing. A far more troubling exchange is alleged to have taken place between Armstrong and Mission Control in Houston shortly after he first set foot on the lunar surface. During a 2-minute interval when official communications were inexplicably interrupted, Armstrong is said to have continued transmitting on a secondary medical channel reserved for monitoring the astronauts' health. While the public never heard these transmissions, it has long been claimed that the recording captured Armstrong reporting metallic structures near the rim of a crater. He allegedly described buildings descending into the lunar subsurface, alongside metallic craft parked in neat rows outside the installations. Although he is said to have taken numerous chest-mounted photographs, the images were never released, and he was ordered back to the module. When asked whether he had deployed the assigned scientific instruments, he replied that he had, but expressed concern that the occupants of the craft seemed to be watching and could easily remove the equipment. In the years following Apollo 11, some who confronted Armstrong in person claimed that he admitted the truth in private, reasoning that no recording devices were present. According to these accounts, he expressed deep unease at what he had witnessed, convinced that the mysterious craft were delivering a clear warning for humanity not to return. The deaths of 2 prominent UFO researchers in October of 2018 reignited speculation in the press. Though apparently unrelated, both men were former American servicemen who had gained notoriety by alleging that NASA suppressed evidence of extraterrestrial activity on the moon. Bob Dean, who served as a sergeant major in the United States Army and was stationed at military facilities across continental Europe, once claimed that NASA had secretly destroyed as many as 40 rolls of Apollo 11 film. He often joked that NASA truly stood for never a straight answer. Beyond this, Dean asserted that during his military career he had read a top-secret assessment of the potential threat posed to humanity by alien visitors. That file, he said, included photographs of crashed spacecraft and the results of autopsies conducted on their crews. Within a week of Dean's death at his home in Tucson on October 11th, authorities in Lansing, New York, were called to a fatal traffic accident. A 74-year-old cyclist named Carl Wolf had been crushed to death by a tractor. Wolf was not only a former Air Force sergeant, but also a man who had publicly declared he once witnessed undeniable evidence of alien presence on the moon. In 1965, Wolf had been stationed at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, specializing in electronic systems repair. One day, temporarily assigned to NASA's Lunar Orbital Survey project, he was taken to a remote hangar populated mostly by civilian scientists and translators. According to Wolf, a fellow serviceman explained that NASA was having difficulty developing images from the most recent lunar mission due to a faulty processor. After he helped correct the malfunction, Wolf was stunned to see a series of photographs depicting what appeared to be a lunar landscape, and, within it, an entire city of strange structures. He later recalled towers, domes, and mushroom-shaped buildings, all situated on the dark side of the moon. Expecting to see the discovery announced on the evening news, he eventually realized the government had no intention of revealing such evidence. By 2001, Wolf joined 20 other former servicemen and intelligence officials in publicly sharing his account. Indeed, images returned by orbital probes have shown curious anomalies, unusual lights glowing from craters, and formations that seem almost artificial, some rising several miles high. More extreme theorists even argue that the moon is not a natural satellite at all, but rather a hollow construct, OCU, perhaps a massive alien vessel sheathed in rock. This view echoes the hollow Earth hypothesis, which imagines vast cave networks beneath our own planet's surface. To support their claims, Moon theorists often cite data from the seismometers left behind by Apollo missions between 1972 and 1977. These instruments recorded a variety of seismic events, their strength and frequency suggesting activity deep within. During Apollo 12, controllers deliberately allowed the ascent stage of the lunar module to crash onto the surface. Earth-based monitors reported that the impact caused a peculiar reverberation that lasted almost an hour, leading some to remark that the moon rang like a bell. Advocates of the hollow moon theory regard this as compelling evidence for enormous cavities hidden within its depths. When one sifts through the stories that have grown out of the Apollo program, it becomes apparent that some events on the lunar surface may defy ordinary explanation. In certain cases, NASA has provided technical answers. In others, by omission or delay, they have allowed fragments of evidence to seep gradually into the public domain. Number 2. Strange occurrences in North America's national parks. The national parks of North America are among the most magnificent and mysterious places on Earth. From Yosemite and Yellowstone in the United States to Yoho and Jasper in Canada, each offers landscapes unlike anywhere else. Snow-capped mountain ranges, still lakes, endless grasslands stretching toward the horizon, and forests that seem to go on forever. These parks attract millions of visitors every year from across the world. Their beauty is awe-inspiring, and it is no surprise that generation after generation of travelers return to experience it. But it is equally unsurprising that many lose their way while hiking or hunting in these vast wildernesses. While the majority are recovered by search teams within 48 hours, some vanish under circumstances that defy explanation, never to be seen again. For all their grandeur, these places seem to harbor a dark and unsettling truth that authorities are reluctant to confront. In the United States, the phenomenon is sometimes referred to as a silent disaster. For over the centuries, thousands have disappeared within national parks. The exact figure is unknown, as the National Park Service only recently began compiling a database of missing persons. Researcher David Paulides has documented more than 1,000 cases in his well-known Missing 411 series. Though his work is exhaustive, the picture it paints is still incomplete. He fears that many cases have never been reported publicly and may never come to light. Paulides began his project after a visit to a national park, where a ranger told him of participating in several recent disappearances and confided a belief that something larger was at work. A seasoned outdoorsman himself, Paulides was intrigued by the idea that skilled hunters and experienced hikers could vanish in terrain they knew intimately. He promised to investigate, unaware that his promise would draw him into an almost impossible mission, one that stretched across years of study and eventually produced a vast body of work. From the outset, Paulides eliminated cases that had reasonable explanations, murders, mental illness, or evidence of animal predation. What remained were accounts that resisted both logic and science. Over time, he noted that the disappearances tended to cluster, often around national parks and the Great Lakes region. He concluded that something deeply unusual was taking place. Whatever was behind it seemed invisible, yet intelligent, patient as a predator lurking in the dark. What follows are some of the strangest cases ever recorded in the national parks of the United States and Canada. In each instance, conventional explanations have either been ruled out or are considered highly unlikely. Perhaps the most famous is the disappearance of 6-year-old Dennis Martin, who went hiking with his father, grandfather, and 9-year-old brother on June 14, 1969, near Spence Field in the Great Smoky Mountains. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Dennis joined several other children in a game of hide-and-seek. When the game ended, all the children emerged from their hiding places, except Dennis. He was last seen running toward a clump of bushes at the edge of a meadow, where the clearing met the dense forest. His father, William Martin, sprinted more than 3 kilometers along the Appalachian Trail in search of him, but found no trace. Over the next 2 weeks, more than 1,500 people combed an area of over 140 square kilometers, aided by helicopters and bloodhounds, but the search yielded nothing. Even a team of Green Berets joined the effort, yet they operated independently, refusing to share information with outsiders. Their behavior many found highly suspicious, given that such elite forces typically appear only in matters of national security. That same day, the Key family was hiking near Rowan's Creek, roughly 4 kilometers away as the crow flies. Around 5:30 in the evening, about 90 minutes after Dennis was last seen, they heard a chilling scream. Looking toward the sound, they glimpsed a creature, half bear and half man, carrying what looked like a small child over its shoulder before disappearing into the forest. The FBI dismissed this, claiming there was no way to cover such rugged ground in so short a time. But Ranger Dwight McCarter later proved otherwise by traversing the same route in just over an hour. Another case is that of Trenny Gibson, a high school student from Knoxville. In October of 1976, she joined a field trip with 40 classmates to the Great Smoky Mountains. As the group hiked from a parking area to Andrews Bald, the students spread into smaller clusters depending on their pace. Trenny walked about 20 meters ahead of her group when she suddenly stopped on the trail. Several classmates later said she turned her head toward the brush, as though something had caught her attention. She then stepped off the trail and was never seen again. Initially, investigators doubted her classmates' account, for the location she supposedly left the trail bordered a near vertical drop, leading down hundreds of meters into dense, impenetrable forest. Despite an extensive search operation, no trace of Trenny Gibson was ever recovered. In June of 2010, a man named Eric Lewis was climbing Mount Rainier with two companions. The three were roped together at intervals of 20 to 30 meters. At an elevation of more than 4,200 meters, the lead climber, Don Storm Jr., stopped to wait so that the party could regroup before pressing for the summit. Soon, Trevor Lane, the second climber, joined him. They waited for Eric, but he never arrived. Retrieving the rope, they discovered that he was no longer attached, despite the fact that only moments before they had seen him behind them, bad weather closed in, and they assumed he had unclipped to rest, an extraordinarily reckless act, but not entirely unheard of. Yet as they descended, they found no sign of him, not even footprints, which seemed to vanish mid-slope. Helicopters scoured the mountain to no avail. Later, rescuers found his backpack, climbing harness, and snow shovel at around 4,100 meters. But of Eric himself, there was nothing. Stephanie Stewart, 70 years old, was a fire lookout working for Jasper National Park in Alberta, Canada. On the night of August 26, 2006, she was stationed at the remote Athabasca Lookout, nearly 40 kilometers from the town of Hinton. Her job was to watch for signs of wildfires by day and sleep in the tower by night. The following morning, on the 27th, Stephanie failed to complete her scheduled radio check-in with her superiors, UNOTR, something required at least 3 times a day. Another employee was dispatched to the remote lookout and discovered she was gone. The only item missing from her cabin was her blanket. There were no signs of forced entry or a struggle. The stove was still burning, a pot of water on top long since boiled dry. Her truck remained parked outside, and investigators could find no tracks other than her own tire marks. She had been sharp-minded, with a loving family, and it seemed highly unlikely that she would have wandered off into the night without reason. Stephanie Stewart was never seen again, and her disappearance forced the provincial government to alter the way it operated the entire lookout system. Charles McCulloch, 19 years old, was an amateur photographer from Virginia. In December of 1974, he hitchhiked to the West Coast on an extended trip, capturing landscapes along the way. By January of the following year, he was staying with a friend in Oregon, planning a short excursion to Crater Lake to photograph the winter scenery. He promised to return within 2 days. He never came back. A large-scale search was launched but yielded nothing. 1 year later, 2 hikers discovered a backpack nearly 19 kilometers from the trail, later identified as McCulloch's. Rangers quickly dispatched a mounted patrol to the area, and before long they found his remains, or what little remained of him. The scene was disturbing. His jeans had been carefully placed upon a log in the wilderness, arranged as though an invisible man were sitting inside them. From the pant legs protruded socks, still containing small foot bones. 4 meters away lay the upper portion of his skull. His shirt, jacket, shoes, and all other belongings were missing, as was the rest of his body. The greatest mystery was how he had reached that location in the first place. On the day he vanished, the ground was covered by more than 2.5 meters of fresh snow. Without a snowmobile, travel would have been impossible. A similar incident occurred in the Yukon in 2004. Bart Schleier, 49 years old, was regarded by those who knew him as one of the most skilled hunters and outdoorsmen in North America. Intelligent, strong, and extremely resilient, he had been hunting and trekking since boyhood. No one doubted his experience. In September of 2004, he hired a pilot to fly him into a remote wilderness, nearly 280 kilometers north of Whitehorse, to hunt moose alone. He arrived well prepared with 3 crates of supplies, camping equipment, and hunting weapons. The pilot dropped him off with instructions to return in 3 weeks. It was the last time anyone saw him alive. When the pilot returned, the camp remained intact with provisions untouched, but Bart was gone. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police expanded the search, eventually recovering only a few teeth and scattered bones, less than 20 meters from the campsite. Nearby, they found a collapsed dry bag, as though someone had been sitting on it moments before, and a hunting bow propped against a tree. Bear and wolf scat from the area was tested and ruled out as a cause. Friends insisted he was too experienced to have been taken by surprise. There were no signs of struggle, no disturbed earth, no broken branches. Authorities asked the obvious question: if he had been attacked, why was the camp still undisturbed? Another baffling case took place 2 years earlier, in 2002, involving Christopher Tompkins, a 20-year-old surveyor from Ellerslie, Georgia. He had been working with 3 colleagues near dense forest in Harris County. At day's end, they headed back to their vehicle along Warm Springs Road, a straight path flanked by trees. The men were spaced about 15 meters apart, with Christopher at the rear. Within seconds, he was gone. Retracing their steps, the group found a dozen coins scattered on the ground, a work boot snagged on barbed wire at the roadside, and strands of fabric torn from his pants. Despite a search involving hundreds of volunteers, Christopher was never located. Months later, his other boot surfaced near a swamp, more than 800 meters from where he had disappeared. The coins suggested that he may have been dragged upside down. Then there was the case of Todd Gieb, a 22-year-old from Casnovia, Michigan. On the night of June 11, 2005, he attended a beer party with his cousin but left around 12:30, saying he felt tired. Though he had not drunk heavily, he chose to walk home rather than risk driving under the influence. At 12:51 a.m., he phoned a friend and was heard to say, "I'm out in a field," before the call abruptly ended. When the friend called back, she heard heavy breathing and the sound of wind before the line went dead. Todd attempted to call twice more, the last time at 12:57. From that night onward, no one ever heard from him again. When Todd failed to appear at a family gathering the following day, a break from his usual habits, his parents alerted the authorities. A massive search followed, involving more than 1,500 volunteers and helicopters equipped with infrared. Lakes and swamps were scoured, but no trace of him was found. It was as though Todd had vanished into thin air. So who, or what, is behind these disappearances? Paulides never offers a definitive answer, but his tone hints at forces beyond the ordinary. Skeptics argue that he deliberately omits contradictory details, insisting each case could be explained rationally. They point to scenarios ranging from animal attacks and serial killers to accidents, voluntary disappearances, or even suicide. Others suggest drug traffickers eliminating unwelcome witnesses or sudden death from illness or exhaustion. Yet each of these explanations falters. Animal attacks leave evidence, but in Paulides' cases, none was ever found. Serial killers leave traces, but here there were none. Many of the missing were familiar with the terrain. They should not have simply become lost. If suicide or escape were at play, why did search teams with dogs and infrared helicopters find nothing? Paulides noted unsettling patterns. Bodies, if recovered, were often found without shoes or in partial states of undress, with causes of death seldom determined. For some, this suggested something supernatural. Theories span from mountain spirits and cryptids like Bigfoot or Dogman to alien abductions, dimensional portals, or even hostile plant life. Incredible though it sounds, some witnesses have survived strange encounters in the parks and lived to tell their stories. One oft-reported phenomenon among hikers is known simply as the silence. Suddenly, all ambient sound vanishes, leaving an oppressive stillness and the overwhelming sensation of being watched. This happened to Jan Maccabee, wife of noted optical physicist Bruce Maccabee, while bow hunting in Ohio in 2010. Around 6:30 in the evening, perched 5 meters high in a tree stand, she realized the forest had gone utterly still. Moments later, she spotted a distorted figure moving between the trees just 6 meters away. It resembled a human shape cloaked in invisibility. She managed to snap a photograph before it vanished, and the forest sounds returned. The image appeared to show part of a face and hair protruding from behind a tree, illuminated by sunlight. Whether supernatural or mundane, the truth remains that becoming lost in these vast, unforgiving wilds is terrifying. These parks are among the Earth's greatest treasures, Kalidi, magnificent, awe-inspiring, but also perilous beyond measure. Number 3. The mystery on the mountain. For more than a century, treasure hunters and thrill seekers have perished under mysterious circumstances while searching for a legendary cache of gold said to be hidden somewhere in central Arizona. Headless corpses, found at last, stand as grisly warnings that something watches from within those mountains. April is ordinarily among the hottest times of year in Arizona, yet even so, the weather in 1958 was unusually brutal. For 2 straight weeks, daytime temperatures refused to dip below 30 degrees Celsius. On the trail, Pinal County Deputy Benjamin Cruz trudged forward, silently praying for rain. For miles in every direction there was no shelter, only the sun, merciless and unrelenting, burning down upon him. Cruz stopped again and took a pull from his canteen. The faint rattle told him there was little left. Fortunately, he carried a spare, thanks to his partner, Joe Donaldson. When they had left the patrol car on the highway, Donaldson had insisted he bring extra water. Leaving Donaldson behind with the 2 young men who had called the authorities had not been a difficult choice. One look at their panic-stricken faces told Cruz they would only slow things down. He had met their type 100 times, curious college kids swept up in the myths of lost gold and Apache spirits guarding it. Rather than endure another hour of nervous chatter, he made them repeat, over and over, their directions to the site until he was satisfied they were telling the truth. Half an hour later, he found what he was looking for. Not far off the trail, tucked behind a rocky outcrop, lay the remains of a camp. Pencil and notebook in hand, Cruz moved slowly through the scene, jotting careful notes. A gun-cleaning kit had been scattered, metal pieces strewn in a wide circle. The absence of spent casings eased him a little, but the missing firearm that belonged with the kit did not. Though wind and sand had already begun to bury the evidence, Cruz could still read the signs of a violent struggle. Gouges in the dirt, small craters in the ground, and the remnants of an abandoned supper flung across the dust. He also spotted a Geiger counter, like something out of the cheap B-movies he'd seen, yet even that was less arresting than what lay a few steps beyond. An army-style sleeping bag. Cruz approached and grimaced at the dark, dried blood soaking the lining within. He crouched, lifted several scraps of correspondence, and saw that names and addresses had been torn away. Keying his radio, he told Donaldson to head back to town and bring reinforcements. Then he sat on a boulder, lit a cigarette, and exhaled a heavy sigh. The body behind this camp would surface sooner or later. It always did. He only hoped, this time, the head would still be attached. The Superstition Wilderness sprawls east of Phoenix, Arizona, dominated by its namesake peak, Superstition Mountain, a sheer escarpment rising 3,000 feet to the south. Few places are so aptly named. Long before Westerners arrived, the indigenous tribes regarded the mountain with equal parts reverence and dread. The Apache believed the mountain's heart sheltered the dwelling of a vengeful thunder god. Only frequent offerings and prayers could keep his wrath from scouring the surrounding land. They also held that somewhere deep within the range yawned a bottomless portal that led straight down into the underworld. Even so, it was the whispers of a subterranean city of gold that drew Spanish conquistadors here in the 1540s. They pushed into the valley and met the Apache warnings head-on. Only death awaited those who trespassed upon the thunder god's domain. Rich veins of ore were quickly found, but extraction exacted a terrible price. Before long, soldiers' bodies began turning up, decapitated. Steel cuirasses and matchlocks counted for nothing against whatever uncanny force guarded the treasure. As their numbers dwindled, the Spaniards withdrew, but the lure of gold never slackened. Across the centuries, seekers returned to the superstitions, cloddy, some triumphant, many never returning at all. Not until the 1840s did a long-term operation take root. The powerful Peralta family mined here for years, until the Apache annihilated miners and kin alike, a warning no one would forget. In time, the Peralta workings slipped into obscurity, until an American Army physician named Abraham Thorne appeared in Phoenix with a backpack full of ore. He claimed to have lived among the Apache for 10 years, treating their sick in exchange for acceptance. In gratitude, they blindfolded him and led him to a deep shaft, granting him leave to take as much gold as he could carry. The abandoned lode was later rediscovered in the 1870s by a German prospector, Jacob Waltz. He never disclosed its location, slipping into the mountains alone and returning with sacks heavy with gold. Records show he sold a total of $250,000 in bullion to the United States Mint before dying of pneumonia in 1891. In the years after Waltz's death, countless expeditions set out to locate and claim the vein he had worked. It became known as the Lost Dutchman Mine, though Waltz was German, not Dutch. As more and more fortune hunters vanished into the hills, the tale outgrew local legend and swelled into a national obsession. The first recorded death linked to the mine occurred in 1896. An eccentric named Elisha Rivas left California for the Superstition Range, erecting a shack high in the mountains to hunt for gold. Rivas was an oddity. He never cut his hair or beard, wandered the canyons naked, and carried a pair of pistols wherever he roamed. His reputation was so strange that even the Apache kept their distance. When his body was found 4 miles from his hut, his head had been severed and neatly placed upon a stone. By June of 1931, an adventurer named Adolf Ruth had openly declared his intent to locate the lost mine. After stocking up on provisions, he vanished into the wilderness. That December, a search party hired by his family recovered his skull, bearing 2 bullet holes clean through the forehead. 4 weeks later, Ruth's headless body was discovered and identified only because of metal pins in his leg from an earlier injury. Though the coroner declared it suicide, claiming Ruth had been unable to continue, his family vehemently disputed the finding. Ruth could not have shot himself twice in the forehead, and the weapon was never found. Another grisly death was that of treasure hunter James Cave in July of 1947. He had been flown by helicopter into LaBarge Canyon with supplies for 2 weeks, then set off on foot to search for the mine. When the pilot returned, he found all of Cave's provisions untouched and no sign of the man. Authorities were alerted, and despite dogs being deployed, Cave's remains were not discovered until February of the following year. His body was bound tightly in a blanket and left dangling from a cliff by rope. Once again, the head was missing. The killings did not end there. The most recent case came in December of 2009. Jesse Capon, a 35-year-old from Colorado, was consumed by obsession with the Lost Dutchman. After multiple forays into the superstitions, he disappeared, leaving behind his vehicle, wallet, and phone on a remote dirt track. 3 years later, his broken remains were found wedged deep inside a vertical crevice, in a place impossible to reach from above. No one has been able to explain how his body came to rest there. Alongside these deaths are numerous reports of strange phenomena, glowing orbs drifting across the night sky, or the gaunt silhouette of a skeletal figure, lantern in hand, moving silently across the desert floor. In the span of more than a century, over 100 murders and unexplained deaths have been catalogued within this wilderness, most tied directly to the pursuit of the Dutchman's gold. The question remains, what force guards this place so ruthlessly? Apache lore speaks of a race called the Tuar Tombs, subterranean beings who occasionally emerged onto the peaks to watch trespassers wander their domain. Few warriors ever survived encounters with them to tell the tale. Easy enough to dismiss as superstition, if not for a parallel legend half a continent away. Nahanni National Park, breathtaking in its beauty, lies in Canada's Northwest Territories. Yet it bears a darker name, the Valley of the Headless Men. Like the superstitions, it was once homeland to indigenous people, CO, the Dene, until the 18th century, when rumors of gold lured in countless prospectors. In 1908, brothers Frank and Willie McLeod vanished while exploring a canyon 200 miles distant. More than a year later, their bodies were discovered near Virginia Falls, Situ, both decapitated, their heads never recovered. A decade after, the charred remains of miner Martin Jorgensen were found amid his burned-out cabin, once again, headless. The Dene blamed a supernatural breed known as the Naha, phantom warriors who wore grotesque masks and collected the heads of their victims as trophies. Beyond murder, other horrors marked the valley. Campers found frozen beside fires still burning, flames that should have kept them alive. And, of course, the persistent reports of UFO activity in and around the region that have never ceased. The Apache conviction that Superstition Mountain concealed a gateway to hell is not unique. Tales of hellmouths appear in many cultures. One of the most infamous lies about 50 kilometers north of Prague. In the 13th century, records tell of winged demons terrorizing the countryside. A knight, dispatched to hunt them, stumbled upon a gaping chasm from which the creatures were said to emerge. Castle Huska, according to legend, was constructed directly atop it to seal the passage and bar the monster's return. Unlike other fortresses of its time, it was built in isolation, far from trade routes or supply lines. Its battlements faced inward, not outward, and strikingly, it contained no kitchens or sleeping quarters to house a garrison. However one interprets these tales, the fact remains that some victims in Arizona were killed with modern firearms. In 1945, treasure hunter Barry Storm claimed he had survived an encounter with a mysterious sniper he dubbed Mr. X. According to Storm, the gunman stalked him for days, firing repeatedly, until he narrowly escaped. He later published a book theorizing that Mr. X might have been the very killer who ended Adolf Ruth's life 15 years earlier. And yet, given the span of decades across which these deaths occurred, it strains belief that a lone assassin could be responsible for them all. This has led to theories of a clandestine organization or cult, secretly exploiting the lost Dutchman's treasure and willing to kill in the most brutal fashion to keep it hidden. As with so many stories, the truth likely lies somewhere between outlandish legend and mundane explanation. Most deaths may well have been the result of murder, suicide, accidents, or natural causes. Decapitations and mutilations could be the work of scavengers or the weather acting on bodies left too long in harsh country. Still, such explanations cannot fully account for the most chilling reports that echo through the superstitions, Andes, and through the centuries. And that is the story for today. Thank you for watching until the very end. If you enjoy videos like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel so that you receive a notification each time we release a new one.